began to warn the people. He said, after a while, it's going to rain after a while, for 40 days and for 40 nights. And the people didn't believe him, and they began to laugh at him, and they began to mock him, and they began to say, it ain't going to rain. It's going to rain, 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 it's
This episode, I catch up with my good friend Joel Jensen-Heath. He's an illustrator and musician from the Bay. You may have seen his work for Safety Propaganda or Deep Roots Radio. He and I also have collaborated on the first edition of the zine Pyr. As with a lot of our phone calls, we cover a lot of ground, from the push to a progressive post-human goo, the myth of good versus evil, toxic wholesome culture in the church, and how he found God.
Okay, cool. Because I kind of like walk when I'm like talking and stuff. Kind of just.
Yeah, I'm the same.
I'm a twitchy guy. My leg is constantly shaking.
Yeah, I had to conquer that. I used to do that all the time, and until I was just like, I'm not going to do this anymore, and I stopped eventually. But I'm definitely the kind of guy who like needs to move around. And yeah, so now when I have like bad service and I can only like walk between certain spots, like I'll just like start swaying or something. I was kind of like the annoying tech guy who like when I used to have like when I actually had like a team or whatever that I ran, like I'd like make us like walk and do meetings because I just couldn't stand sitting and talking.
That's very much like a tech thing.
Yeah, it is.
That's fun. That's so funny though, because like I live in like Tech Central, and like you don't give off the tech guy vibe at the same time, you know?
Yeah. Oh, me?
Like, yeah, because like some like I sold some drawings before to like tech people, and like, you know, when I'm like scheduling a time to meet up with them, like it's always like I'll meet you at 3:46 actually p.m. here. And they'll like pin drop the location. It's like I'm just like, man, I am just like not on this like I'm like not in this like universe.
I've definitely done that. But if they were like real tech guys, they would have just sent you like their calendar link for you to like put to schedule something on their calendar. Like everyone has like their, hey man, like just, you know, find a time that works best for you on my calendar, you know, and then they send the link. But yeah, no, I used to be like that because like I just I don't know. It just, I actually, in some ways, like I feel like it's kind of like obnoxious because it's just not very human. But at the same time, like no one's really kind of like human anymore because like we've all been like subjected to like Silicon Valley like user experience. Yeah. So like now, like everyone expects something from something else. Like if I'm like, hey, let's get together, like, because you're so used to like websites doing everything for you, you kind of expect the other person to like set everything up. And like, and I've realized with people that like, if I don't do that, they'll forget because like they're used to like clicking a button and then like it saves to their calendar. So I'm always kind of like, hey, here's the date, and I'll send them like a calendar invite and then I'll like text them the day before, be like, hey man, we good for tomorrow? Like I just like was totally in that world.
Yeah.
And especially with artists though, because like artists were actually the worst because they would just like totally forget
Oh yeah.
that you ever like, oh dude, I totally forgot we ever said we were gonna get together. Like, I'm like, yeah, I'm here. They're like, dude, we got to do this tomorrow. I'm like, oh man.
My personal favorite is when like other creatives want to like talk, and then it just, you guys set a time, it just doesn't happen, and I feel like there's this unspoken like, yeah, we both remember that time, but we're just not going to say anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely happens. I mean, that even happens in the tech world too, because like most people can't live up to that like robotic standard. And so you got like a bunch of like, you got some like guys who are like basically like, yeah, part of the Borg who are just amazing at like tasks and reminders. But then you got a lot of just like kind of just nutcases in Silicon and like in that startup world. And they can't barely like hold anything together. And they're like, oh yeah, dude, I like they're kind of like the noise guys or something of the scene. But because like I met so many weirdos in like the tech space. Like it was definitely rivaled like the art space as far as like how eccentric and bizarre some people were.
Yeah, they're kind of like two sides of the same coin. Because like for the longest time, I used to follow Bill Orcutt, who was in that noise band like back in the 90s. He's like a tech guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I just like after a while, like my old bandmate and I were talking about this. Like I was like, I had to like unfollow him. It's just too much like Silicon Valley dad. It like ruins the mystique of that band.
Actually, now I'm like more interested.
I feel like there's like a lot of like older millennials and like Gen X noise people that move to San Francisco and be like, all right, I'm going to try and make money now.
Yeah, because you get there and then the culture just kind of like takes over. Because like even like, yeah, the art people that I've met there, yeah, maybe they look like crust punks, but they're also like professional. Not everyone, but there's a lot of like guys with asymmetrical haircuts who are like, making like dark electronic stuff that are also like very professional. That was the first time I ran into that was from like people from the Bay.
I remember I can't remember where I wonder if it was like McLuhan or I can't remember, but like corporate culture, like neoliberal corporate culture really started in the Bay Area. It's like where you have like influx of like technology and the arts, psychedelic drugs, and like corporate 24-hour corporate work slavery, but also kind of leisure at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely like more nuanced and stranger than I think people know when you go down there. Because like I don't know. It's definitely weird. And I think the weird thing about it is like there was the original business culture, which was very different and almost like more polite or English or something. And then startup culture kind of just like annihilated it. And that was very different. And it's almost kind of like because it came from like hacker culture and a bunch of like hippies and artists, like the lineage goes back to that, right? So it's like there's a weird kind of eccentricity and like also like a creativity. It's like less managerial, but it also has like a very professional culture, but it's just different. And it's like, yeah, it's just weird, basically.
Yeah,
and
there's an odd hive quality to it. I've noticed as well. Like I see hexagons like everywhere in these like Silicon Valley buildings, and it just makes me think more of like Borg.
Yeah, they got really big into like the geometric stuff, Canva, like geometric shape stuff. It's definitely weird, and that's why I've always kind of been somewhat attracted to it because I'm like, this is just like such a bizarre group of people. And if you've ever seen that show Silicon Valley, it's actually very accurate. Like it seems like grotesquely like, like a big joke, but like I literally have met people that the show is based on and they do those things. And you're like, oh, dang, this is actually real.
Yeah, they wear like those like weird like synthetic shoes and synthetic pants. It's hard to describe. It's like almost like these like weird yoga outfits or something.
Yeah, they're like professional yoga outfits. They're like stretchy khakis or something.
Yeah, it's super weird to me.
Skin tight. Like Lululemon, basically. It's like they all wear Lululemon and vests. like Arc'teryx
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
dude. That's really what it is. I sometimes wonder if like all the like microplastics in those clothing are like getting to them, you know.
Maybe. It could also be the microdosing.
It could be that too, man. Yeah, it's an the Bay Area I grew up with and knew is very much gone,
Yeah.
to say the least.
Yeah. Anyway.
Anyway, yeah, the long like tirade about Bay Area corporate Silicon Valley culture. I'm not even a part of it. Is the thing.
Yeah, that's inescapable. It's like taking over the whole world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like Southern California is like the exporter of culture, and then the Bay Area is the preternatural ability of telecommunicating it across the world.
It is
So
weird.
yeah, there's definitely something to that. There's like apparently, man, there's this graveyard in, or it's like cemetery is the proper term, in Oakland, and it mirrors the same. There's like I think it's the Mountain View Cemetery, super Masonic looking, but it mirrors like this one in Los Angeles. There's like all these like strange parallels between the Bay Area and LA that kind of get overlooked a lot. They're kind of like this like two sides of the same coin in their own
Hmm.
way.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that where what was the guy's name? The guy who started JPL?
Oh, Jack Parsons?
Yeah. Was he from the Bay? Or did he move
No,
there?
he was like a blue blood from Pasadena, but he overlapped with Bay Area people. Like there's this guy Mertree who came up here and he got like some lodges going. I mean, there was just so much influx, you know. The occult history of California and like technology is like unprecedented how real it is. You know, you had like this guy Clark Ashton Smith writing about it, and he's kind of like the H.P. Lovecraft of the West Coast. And this is long before like a lot of these people are here. It's not surprising to me for some reason that you have the likes of like Kenneth Anger, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, McMurtry.
Well, didn't Huxley move to California too?
Yeah, I believe he did. I think he was in Southern California, if I remember correctly, because there was like before I returned to my Christian faith, I used to attend this place called the Philosophical Research Society, and it was like founded by this guy Manly P. Hall, who was like a Mason, and they had a lot of Huxley stuff there, and I think he had like an affiliation in some capacity with it.
Yeah,
But
well, his influence was pretty big over there in general.
yeah, I mean it's huge, and I think like people like overlook it a lot that there's like an applied science to like occult stuff because it
Right.
is kind of just like a form of technology in its own way. That part is often overlooked, I think. Like some people like they grab onto like the conspiracy occult element of it, and but they can't see that the two are kind of like linked, I think. You know, that like the founders of like JPL is like, you know, basically the disciple of Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, the more I look into it, I think the more I'm convinced that yeah, it's definitely a like the two are linked, and maybe I think the highest levels, and I can't remember who said it, but like somebody was saying essentially like above, maybe it was Christopher Knowles, like above the scientists who are essentially like middle, like they're just like the manager class,
Yeah.
like the technical manager class, and above them as like basically sorcerers.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I definitely arrived at that. And I think people have to like understand that like when they think of like sorcerers or magicians, like the nomenclatures or like as nomenclatures, they're thinking of it in like terms of historicity of like, you
Right.
know, medieval like scruffy
Like
druidic people.
Merlin.
Yeah, exactly, like Arthurian kind of stuff. But I think they kind of mistaken the fact magic is a form of like magic is like very similar to like psychotronics basically, and like
Yeah.
the applied sciences, maybe what some people would call parapsychology and things like the Nazis had this like institute called Ahnenerbe, they were basically conducting all of these experiments around like electromagnetic frequencies, microwaves, autosuggestion, and along with like, you know, this is probably like one of the most fascinating things to me is like their kind of archaeological wars that they were conducting with like other aristocracies in Europe, of like sending this guy Otto Rahn to like different locations to try to locate like things like the Ark of the Covenant or like Noah's Ark, because they believed like, you know, that this was like infused with like some sort of high level tech. There's a lot of, you know, you can go really down that route with Die Glocke, the UFO phenomenon, and so on and so forth. So,
well, Indiana Jones was based off of
yeah, he was based off Otto Rahn. Otto Rahn
Okay.
was basically, I want to say it was Himmler. It might have been Himmler or Hess. I can't remember. I mixed a lot of them up. I think it was Himmler, because Himmler was all really into astrology and stuff. And I think he was like sending him around to like Tibet and probably, I'm almost positive he was down in like Argentina and then, you know, likely Antarctica.
Absolutely. Oh man, doing this. The hardest thing about doing like recording something with your friends is like you want to just like go off on like stuff you just want to talk about, and then I'm like,
For sure.
But I also don't want to like overthink.
You need a proper,
like,
right,
you know, moving us in the right direction.
Sure, yeah.
We'll just wing it, and then I'll just have to like spend like a day editing. That's fine with me.
Do you need like a proper intro first? Because that's been in the back of my mind since we started. Because we, you know, just you and I get going.
I know, yeah. And I didn't even think about it. We just like, I didn't even think about it at all. We just like jumped in. No, I'll probably, if I need to do an intro, I'll just do it after this, is what I was thinking.
Okay, cool, man. Yeah. Do you want to just stay on the esoteric
Yeah, keep going.
route, or?
Keep going. If you got more, keep going.
I mean, yeah, that's a lot. I mean, there's so much. I mean, you can go into like, there's a guy, he's not Christian. His name's Walter Bosley. Or I don't know, like, I don't know his views really, but he's kind of this guy that really chronicled a lot of history of early California. And he kind of gets at that there was like a sort of aristocratic conspiracy, perhaps, to utilize the resources that California had to offer. And like he gets into like the history of like the gold rush, Disneyland, and in particular, you know, an area that I actually grew up near called Sonora, California. And there's like a history of a large German population being there, and this kind of mysterious group called the Sonora Aero Club. And there was this guy whose paintings were collected by a wealthy oil tycoon named Charles Delschow. And a lot of his paintings depict like UFOs, the CERN Hadron Collider, and like all this advanced tech, but it's like done in this kind of like outsider artist approach. Who's that guy that wrote that thing, The Vivian Girls? I can't remember that artist's name, but that like outsider artist from Chicago. It's like if he illustrated like diagrams of advanced technology, and it links it somehow to John Trump, Donald Trump's uncle, and this area called Sonora, California. And it's known as like the most paranormal area in all of California. But there were these like rumors of this secret organization called NIMSA, which was this like German, like secret order or something that was kind of overseeing like the push for this kind of like advanced tech, basically. And I don't know where
isn't LA from Sonora too? Doesn't he live out there?
No,
Marzulli?
he lives down in he's down in Southern. He's like I think he's in like Malibu or something.
Oh, okay.
Sonora's like it's an odd spot because it's in like kind of like the northeast corner of California, and like interestingly not far from there, you know, maybe like several hours, but close by comparison to other places, is that place called Lovelock Cave, which is where the Paiutes supposedly fought a race of giants.
You don't have to say supposedly. I know you firmly believe it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was trying to remember the Vivian thing, but I think my mind was just going to. There was a band called like Vivian Girls. Do you remember them at all? They were like a Pitchfork, I think, favorite at one point. I don't know why I
Yeah,
brought that up.
I lived with the bassist of one. I don't think it was the Vivian Girls. It was like the Babies, but one of the members had been in the Vivian Girls.
I
This is
think
like early. This is like early 2010s, like Pitchfork
yeah, it
guitar
was like
band.
late 2000, like right, yeah, turn of the decade. I think my friend was on a comp with them around that time too. Sorry, that was a total rabbit trail there, but it's like I don't know why I remember them. Like I have not listened to that music probably since like 2008 or something, but it just like for
Same.
whatever reason popped up.
Yeah, I don't know. It's. I mean, it's a kind of a. It's an. The 2010s was just a strange period of time in music. Like it was like still considered culturally to be cool to be in a band, but it was also like totally dying at the same
Yeah.
time.
I totally checked out of bands in that decade and it went full into like Tumblr micro genres and deconstructed club. Uh and then I would like host, I'd host like parties or whatever, and we would like it was so stupid, but I mean we knew it was stupid at the time, but like, it'd be like we're against guitar bands.
Oh
Uh
yeah,
yeah, that was a thing.
guitar bands
So
were so. Guitar was like the pariah for a long time.
yeah.
You can't have a
But
guitar in the band.
I
I was surprised, like I never saw any like techno dudes pull the move of like playing guitar for a long time because it like yeah, it was just like no one wanted to touch the guitar.
Yeah, it became like super passe for a while. For like really all of the 2010s. Like, I mean, it was still going on. Like, I mean, probably, well, I mean, realistically, like guitar bands were probably still bigger than anything happening anywhere else. But like my whole world was like, I didn't see anybody like play a guitar, maybe except for like, oh shoot, who's that experimental guy who did Technology of Tears? Fred Frith.
Oh yeah, I've seen him a few times. He's great.
Yeah, he's fantastic. It's the only like experimental show, or I shouldn't say only, but like one of the very few that my wife was like actually into. I think that was the only guitar, and that was not really, obviously not a band. So
His stuff is like not very like it's like not inaccessible. You know what I mean? Like it's like it's very like pretty in its own way and like has
yeah,
cool timbre and like because he's like I don't know, he's like a classical guitarist. So it's like he's not just like some like noise freak like dragging a guitar on like concrete. It's like I don't know. Every time I've seen him, I'm like, man, that like this looks like technical, like what he's doing.
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I liked like the freaky noise guitar stuff. Like, I like there was a period of
same.
time, like that like label Black Editions with like KG Hino and like I don't know.
No.
I think like Lauren Connors. Like, I was into a
Oh,
lot
okay.
of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I was into
Connors is
that really.
great.
Yeah, that stuff is like cool though because it's like it makes you think of like mountains and like fog. It's like kind of like black metal adjacent, weirdly. I don't know why like they're not the same approach, but it's just it makes me like it puts me in that like mood or something.
Connors had some sort of like almost kind of like lo-fi black metal kind of feel. Like instead of like going out into the woods and recording out there, it was like his stuff always felt a little bit more like in the city or something. But
Yeah,
but it
totally.
was still
Yeah,
beautiful. Like he found some sort of like secret little like park with a pond and like like a suitcase and a shoe in it or something. I don't
yeah,
know where I'm going.
very zen and stuff too.
Yeah,
Like
very definitely very zen.
cloud of unknowing, kind of like zen noise.
Yeah, when I like took like a break from being online for a couple months, I like only listened to like Connors and a lot of like fourth world music, honestly.
Oh, nice.
And that stuff is great. Like I absolutely love that stuff. I'm trying to think of who else. Like I was obsessed with like that whole thing for a while. Um man, I'm drawing a blank on the names. I can never remember on the spot like anyone's names. So whatever. Anyway.
Yeah, my brain's just kind of like broken around music because like left my records in LA and then like my computer somehow deleted my like Apple thing. So I've been listening to like YouTube for like years now. I don't know. It's kind of like broken my way of like consolidating like my concept of like taste or something, or like categorizing algorithm or something. Like it's just, I don't know. Like I'll find something like I think I sent you that Daisuke. I can't remember his last name. That like outsider guitarist from Osaka from like late '90s, and I was like, oh, this is sick. This is something I really like a lot.
That was
But
fantastic, actually. I love that album. It's great.
yeah, I just think like yeah, music's like it just feels very much like the Talos is not there right now.
Also like I think Twitter has broken my brain. That and like calendar reminders and Google Maps. Like I definitely feel like less smart.
Real.
Even though like even though like maybe
Same.
I have more knowledge, I'm like dumber for some reason.
Yeah, yeah. My brain just feels like fractured a lot of the time by like the excessive amounts of like hybrid information I'm like taking in on like a daily basis.
Like
Like
I
on one
can't
hand, go ahead.
no, I'm just gonna do some tired explanation of like how like, you wake up and you open your phone and you're like fried for the day. But if you don't, you're like you can like function.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
No, yeah. I mean, I just put my phone and my laptop outside of my room now. I kind of honestly, man, like even like in like 2019, I was kind of already feeling this sense of like, oh man, like music like feels like it's kind of like it's going, but it's also kind of like dead. I don't know. It's hard to explain. That had just been like my state of like mind in LA because I just like was going to like just so many shows all the time, but like it just kind of felt like there was this like kind of emptiness or something that, and maybe that's just like a symptom of getting older, but it didn't seem to have like the same energy even like from 5 years earlier.
Yeah,
That
no, I literally talked about this with Zach the other day.
Mhm.
It was the
Yeah.
exact same thing. It was like from 2016 to 2018, things like really sucked. And then 2019, things got better, but not in the music world, essentially, like per se. It was more like in other areas. Like that's when like the theory, the podcast stuff took off. And that was interesting to me, honestly. Like people dog on it, but I actually found like the COVIDian era to be like actually pretty interesting. And but now now it's over and everyone wants to move on because like everyone's brains are busted from being online too much.
Yeah, online and like theory overload.
Yeah. You should speaking of that, you should read my buddy Max's he just posted something on reality spam or whatever. Posted something on Twitter. And it was actually really good. And not just on Twitter, but like how basically like the Musk take over and just basically like where the state of like the discourses. Um, I think like when you hear that isolated, it sounds stupid, but if you read it, it's actually really good. I think you'd like it.
Yeah. Is it like framing like the Musk takeover in like a negative light or a positive light?
No, definitely negative.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Musk to me is like more insidious than like other figures because he's kind of like the Janus. Like he plays like both sides. And like by doing that, he's like able to kind of like regain terrain while also like evading criticism at the same time. He's kind of like taken hold of the dialectic.
Yeah, no, I mean
Uh,
that's exactly like yeah, I mean that's why you got to read this article because it essentially like says very similar things here. There anyway, I'm not gonna go into it. You gotta read it. It's really good. But it
mhm.
definitely we're spiraling out of control at this point. And things that maybe were good at one point, like I don't know. It feels like
Yeah.
I don't know where to go from here, basically.
There's kind of like a dread still, I think people feel. Like, even though like COVID was like a few years ago, I kind of feel like there's still this like dread that's like set in. And it's like, I mean, I could, there's multiple routes to address it. I mean, sometimes like theory people go into like this sort of suspended realm of concepts. And then conspiracy types kind of tend to go into more of like a pantomime of reality. And I kind of tend to more function on the latter more these days over theory, just because sometimes like conspiracy feels like a form of like, I don't know, like remote viewing of reality or something, like animating reality with like characters and stuff. So to me it kind of seems like, with like the concept of like Twitter being called X, I think Joseph Farrell said this, like X is like often thought to symbolize the antediluvian world, because like it's, if you look at the Giza pyramid from a bird's eye view, it's like it is an X. So there's this kind of like, also it's like very dialectical, versus if you look at like the crucifix, like it is an X, but it's not like its dimensions are adjusted to like kind of equate to like a third kind of like Trinitarian approach versus this kind of hard Masonic black and white. And like I kind of feel like that like dialectics is kind of pure chaos in its own way, like because there's like a suspension of any sort of like objectivity. That objectivity can even be like, a much more mysterious three-part system, that's not as, because dialectics is very like alluring in that it's like it's easy to categorize, but it has no resolution.
You mentioned like the duality, kind of the fakeness of like this like idea of duality before, which I like and I agree with, especially the part that like the duality makes it seem as if like good and evil are on the same plane, which they're not. It's more
No.
of like some sort of like mold or I don't know. It's some sort of like parasitical kind of thing more than it is anything else. Like the devil's not on the same level as like Christ,
Yeah.
That to me makes a whole lot of sense. But you had mentioned something about like the third, like looking at it not as a duality, but like as like and more of like a Trinitarian type of a view. And I'm still trying to figure out what you were saying by that. Maybe you can like explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. It's not like my own original idea or anything. I'd say, several people have. Like I pulled maybe more from Joseph Farrell around it, where I think it's like St. John of Damascus basically says something. It's very cloud of unknowing, like, apophatic theology, where it's like, if created order exists, God does not exist, because God is the uncreated light that exists outside of creation. And so it's kind of this like conceptualization that reality is, oh man, this small dog's barking at me. I'm gonna go back inside. Created order and reality is kind of in and of itself like a large creature or something. And versus like, I think he was kind of saying this, that like with Western interpretation of Christianity, you really had this kind of Platonist split of duality of like spirit and body, Christ, the church versus culture, man, woman. Like it's in this like twos. And the problem with that, and I think Farrell has said this, is like a lot of it's influenced transhumanism, which is that you can divorce you from the body, and like, I guess the original conception that like the Desert Fathers had is that the self is also the created self. The physical body is intrinsically tied to like the soul.
Yeah.
I think just like in general, dialectics really splits. It's like an entropy. It's almost like, I mean, I've even heard this with Hegel, that Hegel was like an initiate, and that he kind of just took the idea of dialectics and then kind of put the continental philosophy kind of lingo to it. You know, I guess probably some theory people would like scream and say that's like a very gross, you know, profane reading of Hegel, but I just see it constantly, like the dialectical tension as just being really almost like just like, yeah, like it's like just it's like a total psyop, and it keeps people like locked in this feedback loop. I guess to finish it is like, since we're kind of like talking like theology more now, is like Dugin's, this is like a, to phrase Dugin, Christ was kind of this unifying thing in the ancient world of the Apollonian Dionysian order, which inherently were dialectical to one another, order and chaos. And his crucifixion was this unification of the law being fulfilled. And then like in the law being filled, like in an Apollonian sense, and then a descent into, you know, Sheol and the resurrection of Christ and the inhabitants of Sheol, and then ascension into heaven. Like that kind of forms this like bridge basically between these metaphysical ideas and philosophical ideas.
Okay.
So that
So
bridge is the third part, I guess. What I'm getting
okay.
at.
I was looking, I don't know why this came to mind, but I was looking at kind of like the reconciliation of creation to God. And I noticed this kind of pattern where like God creates creation. There's a spiritual family and there's an earthly family.
Yeah.
And um and they get separated like at the Eden event. And
Yeah.
I mean, there already was like a hierarchy, but it was more pronounced after the fall. And so you see the separation of the heavenly and the earthly family. But then you see another separation within the earthly family, like of man and woman, right? And
Yeah.
what we notice is every time there's like a point of breaking into twos, there's a reconciliation. Man and woman join and create a mystical union and they're one again, right? And then there's, you know, at the end of things, the spiritual and the earthly are brought back together again. And this theme actually happens quite a bit throughout, not the Bible, I guess, but like just like throughout the story of creation. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm trying to figure out like, is the spirit like that third thing that's always it? Maybe the problem is that I'm thinking about it like in 3D or something, when like really like the spirit like is like across time or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but like
Well,
there's
yeah. I mean, I guess, you know, you're kind of hint like what is kind of like the knowledge of good and evil dialectics. Like
right.
perhaps like the knowledge of dialectics is the very like infection of, like it's like a philosophical mind virus that, you know, entered into creation and kind of divided everything into this kind of polarity system, you know.
Yeah.
Because like every like literally like if you really think about like anytime now like I read any essay, the moment I start seeing dialectics, I'm kind of like, oh man, I don't know if I can take this seriously. Because it's like it feels like this kind of like an infection or something, you know. Yeah, we're like humans are divorced from this their kind of like origin, and therefore are like left to kind of wander and you know,
Well, even
conceptual origin or something. Go ahead. Yeah.
you know, even like at the Babel event, right? There was the nation of Israel split off from the Gentile nations. There's another like polar opposite thing. But then Christ, the union in Christ, brings it back together again. You've got the garden event, spiritual material, well, not material, because they're spiritual is material too, I would say. But earthly and heavenly splits, male and female split. They're brought together back in marriage. Gentiles and Israel split. They're brought back in Christ, which is another type of marriage. And then the spiritual family and the earthly family are brought back again, like after everything into God. You know, so it's like it starts with God and it like breaks apart, and then he's like constantly putting it back together until the end when it's like all one again.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think you can kind of see that the great tyranny, or, you know, maybe it's the human condition, is that humankind tries to take that unification into its own hands, with, a Babel kind of event. Because, you see that sentiment echoed in End of Evangelion, that hideous strength. And then even like Adam Weishaupt, who founded the Bavarian Illuminati, like that was when a lot of his letters were confiscated. They were basically trying to be like, well, the only way we can really resolve this split in the human condition is that we need to return everyone to this kind of primal origin where no institutions exist, no individuality exists, no man or woman exists. We have to completely like destroy all boundaries and return to this kind of primordial soup conceptually. And it like,
right.
I think that's this time and time again, you see we're kind of like living in that push again of this like technological kind of hubris of kind of dissolving the borders.
Yeah.
In order to bring about a kind of utopia, but that utopia is always wrought with, just destruction.
Well, so it's interesting because there's like a unity and plurality happening with God, where like man and woman are distinct, but at the same time they're the same in marriage. Same with like the church and like there's no Jew or Gentile, right? No man or woman, but there's still like a uniqueness there. Whereas on the other end, Evangelion and Hideous Strength, yeah, it's very much like you're part of this universal kind of like post-human goo. And it like there's an elimination of like the individual altogether. So like their version of unity is like actually not unity. It's like a really kind of like perverse version.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of always there's always that like Christ haunted impulse throughout history where like there's that desire to unify under something, albeit like, forms of nationalism, revolutions, suffrage groups. You see this time and time again, this sort of impulse.
Reactionaries.
Yeah, completely. And it's like you kind of, and like it inherently becomes dialectical because it always becomes a group standing in opposition to the whole or a larger group. Time and time again, you just see it always resolve back to dialectics and then just it return to entropy, and then it's the other side usurps. And that's kind of in a lot of ways the kind of Masonic design of like the right-left dialectic in America, which seems oddly similar conceptually to the top two shells of the Kabbalistic death tree of Gevurah and Chesed. And then, like there's a 3-part system with that too, which the Einsoft and like, but like people always think it's just the left versus the right, but they don't realize there is a manipulation of the third, even in like the artificial sense. So yeah, I think a lot of people like it's an impulse to become dialectical, but then both weirdly like it's structured more like thirds. Like I don't know. There's like I was even reading a psalm recently where it's like God's literally specifically saying like do not like entrust only the left hand or only entrust in the right hand or something. It's like I'm totally horribly paraphrasing. I can't even name what number it was, but I literally saw it and I was like, oh wow, this is just like a total warning against like this kind of thinking.
Interesting. So we're already on this like topic of that's like touched on Hideous Strength, with which we both just read. So I was wondering if maybe we should go into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
But I guess beyond like the obvious thing of it being somewhat prescient, like of what's happening today, although which it was. I mean, he actually even like it was actually pretty prophetic because he even said, I think in the book, like which was written in the early 40s.
Yeah.
Like he was like, oh yeah, like in 60 or something years from now, basically like was outlining what what's basically happening today. um, which was interesting. But the transhumanism thing is really, I mean, basically that's a book about transhumanism, and where I think you and I align on is because a lot of the online discussion is about like accelerationists and woke and all this other stuff. But I think like the bigger thing that's happening, and maybe this is just me being like a schizo, Christian, it's more of like or being played. And like you have the rationalists, which I would even the accelerationists seem like they fit in that category, but like in a different way.
Yeah,
Like Elon is a Redditor at his heart, you know.
totally.
And there's and this is also like something that Max had brought up in that article, was about how like they all like worship land, but they all ignore the part where we all die. So there's like this weird thing about like transhumanism that's happening, but it all feels to me like the guidance of like the Watchers from like Enoch and Genesis,
Right.
where they already got like punished from messing with humanity. And so they can't really do it again in an overt way, right? They can't be the ones coming in and doing this stuff again because they already saw what happened to the other guys who got thrown in Tartarus. And so it's like they have to like do it from behind the scenes, like influence man to want to do it. That's my take, and I think you and I both have talked about that before. But
Yeah.
it's a way to kind of like do the days of Noah, but because it's men doing it, it's like retarded and like
Yeah.
comes
Go
off
ahead.
real cringe. Like there's like a startup component with people like trying to like, like manipulate dreams and VR and all this stuff and AI. But ultimately it's like Watcher, like sons of God worship.
Yeah, I think the thing that like I've kind of come to see is I sometimes wonder if it was like stupid back then, like because like you read these like the Greek myths and the Roman pantheon, and like a lot of it really just sounds like a bunch of pervy like Hollywood celebrities, getting into these like trysts and like backstabbing and like just really like I remember like I had to read like all these Greek myths when I was like in the 6th grade at my like weird hippie public school in Northern California. And like I even remember thinking then I was like, this is like really creepy. There's something like really puffed up about this. Sorry to curse. But like, and I just kind of think that's the really, I don't know, disgust, I think, is something like of a natural response to it. Because like, yeah, I mean, clearly the antediluvian world uh still kind of influence. I hold the view firmly that this stuff did occur and that its influence haunts all civilization now. Clearly it was like a society of like high technology and like very prosperous and stuff, but like, yeah, it's like with land, like everyone ignores the part where, people become just like organ harvesting, like in a sort of suspended like tube of nutrients for elites. There's like a horrible dark truth that is overlooked, because yeah, to do the transhumanism thing right, you have to start, it's like every human being has like a battery and a life in it, and you can kind of like elongate it a little bit, but ultimately you have to artificially suspend it, which means like, acquiring resources that, to an absurd amount that like then affects the general population or other things. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of second order things that happen.
And the culture that is promoting is deadening. And I think that's by design, where it's like you have this sort of like, Borg, very low vibrational, just like, yeah, like Funko Pop hell, of like that's like the culture of it.
That's interesting. Yeah, because maybe it was always Funko, even back then, because it was like a perversion. And yeah,
Yeah.
maybe we're just reliving it just in a different way, just like less. I think it'll get more mystical again. I think we're getting I think culture in general is becoming reenchanted. But
Yeah,
uh,
it's definitely happening.
yeah, so maybe it just continues on in that path.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes like I've been like lately thinking about how my previous Christian views, which were more like Kierkegaardian influenced, of like kind of existentialism, which there's kind of a like strong materialism to that, like very Freudian. A lot of that stuff, it's very much like the individual despairing over, is there more to this? And like, it's funny because like when I look at that stuff now, I'm like, I don't even have to be like told that there's more. Like, we have technology that's like validating like metaphysical claims,
Mm-hmm.
Even like a lot of like occult sciences have an applied science to them, because like, I mean, I think it's just recently they found like a bacteria that is basically dung becoming gold. And that's like a like alchemical manuscript of like, turning dung into gold. And like people didn't really understand what that meant. And it's like, oh, there's these resources that like actually exist in the world. And like maybe this is like, to quote, this is a Joseph Farrell, that this is like an encoded message left behind to find stuff, to like reinvigorate the antediluvian kingdom or empire. So I mean, the reenchantment thing I think is definitely occurring. I don't know if that's some sort of, I don't know if it's like an aesthetic always or not, because like, you do see like the trad cat thing, or like, BAP bros, or, pagan woke radicals. Like, they do seem like they're aesthetic. And I sometimes wonder if like aesthetics are a sort of like suspension of like faith or belief. But it is there. Like, I'm seeing just like, this is kind of everywhere now. So I don't know if that made any sense or not, what I was kind of getting at. That it does feel, though, like perhaps the increase in these kind of preternatural technologies has made perhaps like the kind of the previous like conception of things to seem more tangible now, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
You and I are speaking into a liquid crystal across, a time zone.
Right.
That is like very magical.
No, 100%. Yeah, no, sorry, my brain's like still kind of fried. I was hoping like struggling.
Dracula. Oh man.
But no, okay. So I think we beat that one to death. What do we want to go from here?
Man, I hope I'm helping you.
No, you are. No, the previous stuff was good. I like where we went with it. I'm like, I'm the dead weight on this call.
No, it's all
for
good.
sure. And so, okay, so grew up in the church. What kind of church was it?
I was baptized in the Episcopal Church. And then a lot of my early memories were there because there was like red carpets and they were performing the liturgy. And so it kind of had this like spooky vibe to it. And it was like kind of in this wooded area of Northern California. But then at some point in my like early elementary years, we went to a Presbyterian church for the next like, I don't know, like 10 years. And so that was very mainline Protestantism, acoustic guitar, U2 rock, sometimes funk bass, worship music.
We actually would play. I went to a Christian school, and they would actually literally would play U2 music during like our chapel, and they would just like redo some of the lyrics. So the U2 thing is real.
Yeah, it's really weird. I wonder where it came from, because like I don't know.
He's Christian, right? Bono.
Is he? I never know. He looks like Geddy Lee to me. of Rush. I always thought he was like a globalist type.
Well, he kind of is, but like he had some like I like 80s U2, but a lot of the early stuff was pretty religious, actually, if you go back and listen to it.
My brother and I had like the Rattle and Hum DVD that someone in our youth group gave us in like 02 or 03.
My youth pastor at the Presbyterian church I went to growing up, basically like the Swiftie of the time for U2. And like everyone freaked out about U2 at the Presbyterian church. I'm not really sure why Presbyterians loved U2 so much, but they absolutely did.
I have no idea. I don't know if it's maybe like Presbyterians is the closest thing to non-denominational of like going in that direction or something, but
Well, it was like most non-Christian music wasn't good, but U2 got the pass.
yeah,
I'm sure Coldplay did later on, but I was out of the church when that came out. So
yeah, same. I mean, I think like right around the time I left the church as a teenager, like I liked Thrice, and I guess that was cool to like because they were on like Island Records or something, and then they kind of had like a secular tinge to them while being Christian. And this is like I guess like '04 or something.
that seems more like evangelical to me, Thrice.
Yeah, I think they're from like the Bible Belt of California, which is like Orange County. I don't even know if they're Christian anymore, honestly. I think maybe they might have
Deconstructed.
yeah, I think they did. It's pretty common with like a lot of those bands that are like I remember I like Pedro the Lion, all that stuff. Some of like the Jade Tree adjacent like bands and like
Well, even more of the main kind of like CCM guys all deconstructed. Like some of the DC Talk guy, or like I guess just one of the DC Talk guys did the Euro looking one, Kevin Smith. And then I think the Jars of Clay guys, like to some degree, did, or they became like maybe kind of like neoliberal types. But a lot of those
yeah.
bands ended up deconstructing.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with the manipulation of language and that kind of vein of Protestantism, I think, was going so far into just kind of like mirroring the culture that it was
Yes,
kind of
they desperately wanted to like appeal to like the youth, and
yeah,
that was like the beginning. Like when I was leaving the church in I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, it was definitely like they were transitioning into like some sort of like lame cultural apologetics where it
mhm.
was definitely like, how do we appeal to the youth? Like, oh, the youth likes rock music. Like, have you guys heard of Switchfoot? You know, like, which really watered it down. I think is why like a lot of people in that era hated like the church, because it was like very, very shallow instead of like presenting the gospel, which is insane. Um, the Bible's nuts, you know?
It really is. Like I remember just thinking about that recently where I mean, I think it's in That Hideous Strength where C.S. Lewis makes this note. I think it's during like that humiliation ritual that the main character is going through near the end where he's like asked to step on the crucifix. And it's like some sort of like very Catholic, visually accurately depicted Christ, you know, being crucified with blood and rigor mortis setting in on a cross. And I remember he has this moment where he's like, oh, this is what they speak of like the truth, the good, and the beautiful. That like corny phrase that you see, you know, Roman bust Twitter profiles. He's like, this is like this belief system is out of place with this too. This is absolutely strange, like on a real level. And I think you kind of have with that late 90s early 2000s kind of Christian culture, I think they really tried to like whitewash more, because I think like even the might have even been like the singer from Thrice said like showing the crucifix is like a form of child abuse. And it's
Oh,
kind of
really?
this thing. Yeah, and I think that's kind of, you know, you have that purity cult going on where like people are, I think a lot of times like Christians don't really know how to like, they know the world is like in a fallen state, but it's like they can't, and like I run into this still culturally, is like they can't really reconcile that this belief system is really weird, you know, like really weird
Yeah.
and really offensive. There's kind of this like impulse to almost like hide this stuff. You know, the case in point would be like Nephilim, but it's like, you know, even just the surface level story stuff. It's like a flood, the Exodus, like genocides, like Christ being crucified. Like there is this really, you know, heavy dark side to it. I don't know. I feel like there was like a push to kind of like remove that, I guess, in
Yeah.
like the
No,
early 90s
absolutely.
into like the 2000s and stuff. So
Yeah, that's the era I was basically going in and out of church in. It was definitely whitewashed. Yeah, the purity culture thing is interesting. And I'm trying to think of like why that had somewhat of like it really had a hold on like mainstream church culture, and it still does. I think maybe it's getting a little bit better in some circles, but still there's this kind of like almost like if you admit the darkness that exists, it's like God doesn't win or something. It's like I don't know. It's like it's kind of like, oh, if we in contemporary times, I should say, like if it's like if you admit to some of like the dark stuff, it's like you're ruining what Christ did at the cross or something, and like everyone has to be part of this purity culture. But in the process of it, they like sterilize their own story. And so then they have to like wipe out. They're like, oh, well, like God wiped out a bunch of people. We got to like reconcile that whole thing. Nephilim's too weird, which is kind of like Augustine's fault in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
Although, which is weird because like he was like not down with angels sleeping with women, but he was like okay with like satyrs and incubus and succubi and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, like, all right, that's like it's weird that you would believe in that, but not
Yeah.
the Nephilim. But
It's yeah, I think you get like a lot of like Christianity does suffer just from kind of the same faults that like a lot of human, which is kind of like why I left the church initially, even though I had like no problems with believing in God or like Christ, was just I think it suffers from the dysfunctional elements of humans relating to one another, and the way hierarchy structures facilitate themselves. Because like when I was going to church, like even though there were these like Christian bands things, and my mom worked in like at the Christian bookstore at my church, and they sold like DC Talk CDs and stuff, and like the little like soft rocks that say like love, and they have like the fish like thing on it.
yeah,
A big reason I like left is I felt like the culture of like the church was just kind of like some dudes who were going to go graduate high school and go into the military. And then there were some that were like into sports and going to go to medical school. And it was like kind of just this like, I mean, it's like hard to even describe now because like, things are so weird socially now, but it was almost like kind of like that typical thing of just normie popular kids being like the ones that go to church, versus like the only guy I hung out with like at church like smoked weed and wore like an Opeth shirt, and he like played drums in like the worship band. And like he brought his like double kick drum once, and like this guy was like slap funk bassing with like a wah wah pedal, and like the other guy's playing acoustic guitar, like doing these like U2 songs. Like I don't know.
amazing.
Yeah, I just think you like really lose like the kind of realness. I don't know if that's like the right word, but like I just kind of was like, well, like I'm into like art and like bands and like I don't know, just weird stuff. I guess this isn't kind of my place, So they're like kind of
Yeah.
up and left for a long time.
Yeah,
Looking back,
it is funny looking back because you're like something is like, I mean, it was so simple too, like in that regard where like, yeah, if you listen to Radiohead in like the late 90s, early 2000s, like
exactly.
you could not fit into a church. It was just,
No,
like just
exactly, man.
Radiohead. And Radiohead ended
Yeah,
up becoming like the favorite band of all churchgoers eventually. But like in the beginning, it was like, yeah, you don't belong here.
yeah, man. My OK Computer CD next to my POD CD and my PlayStation CD like holder thing for my Walkman.
Yeah,
It's like
amazing.
yeah, I think that is like a very cultural thing though, with Protestantism and even to a degree like Catholicism in America, where you kind of have this like I don't know purity takeover, and like and then again just to go back to our conversation, it slides into dialectics. And I mean, if you want, I mean, now it's like posed for a good time for me to even mention like why I returned to
No, that was my next
to
question for you. Yeah, it's like what brought you back then?
I mean, it was kind of like the question we were just kind of posing is like I had like about 10 years, about give or take, maybe a little bit more, lived in New York and LA, was like playing in bands. And it was especially in LA, I was like working in a warehouse, like doing art handling stuff and playing in a band. And I just kind of was like noticing there was like this like void in my life on a huge level. And like I couldn't really like account for like darkness in my life, where like I was like going to this warehouse that was like basically like it housed like Oprah. It was like Oprah's estate, and it was like the cheap art handling warehouse basically. The guitarist from Saccharine Trust was there. The band Crystal Stilts used to work there, and like Deerhoof and like other people. But like, you know, it was like next to a slaughterhouse and a crematorium. And it was just this ultra bleak, like Repo Man style landscape where like I'm just like watching like, you know, 500 chicken carcasses like being dropped into like a dumpster, and like blood spilling out all over the street, and then like pigs screaming. And then one time I stepped out of the warehouse, and the guy I worked with, who was in this like failed band in the early 90s, like I was like, man, it smells bad. And he's like, dude, it smells like dirty ass, because like they're burning the human bodies right now in the crematorium. And I was just like, man, looking back, I'm just like so gross and so dark. Kind of like looking at like, oh, this is like the industrial world we live in, but this is just like what's making it run. Like this,
Dang.
it's like this part of the city. And like I mentioned to you this before, like I was like living in this area of Chinatown next to a freeway, and like my roommate before I moved in told me it was haunted. Super paranormal, really high levels of just fear and anxiety. And I lived there for years too, which is like the weird thing. And I'd have like insomnia, and I just like go down at like the middle of the night and just like stare at this like plastic Home Depot chandelier we had flickering like it was like that movie Poltergeist. I just kind of like was starting to be like, oh man, like there's something more to, I don't know. I feel like maybe just like with like the kind of like sheltered, happy upbringing I had in Northern California with like loving Protestant parents, like maybe I was like a bit naive to like the realities of life up until that point. And like it kind of, I don't know, I think it was just kind of like moving me in this direction. And it wasn't immediate, but I started going to this place, the Philosophical Research Society. Like I would like read like Carl Jung, or I can't remember this, like some like new age guy, Alan Watts, I think. Just like kind of typical stuff, like some kind of like art fag guy is like, search for meaning, and
Yeah.
reading Zen stuff, which I still like that stuff and still see a lot of good things to be gleaned from that. But it wasn't really like answering this like very visceral reality that I was like inundated with, along with just the kind of preternatural things occurring like in my apartment. Like I had like a sleep paralysis demon or whatever you want to call it stung me once. And some point, like, yeah, I like it, when I look back on it now, I see God's hand moving through me and slowly pushing me towards him. I like said the Lord's Prayer once when I was like having one of these episodes, because like basically I'd go to bed every night and like I would feel something sit at the edge of my bed and just like tap my feet. It was like super creepy, man. And like, yeah, I said the Lord's Prayer one night when like I felt like something was on top of me. It was like really frightening, and I felt it go away. And like, I don't know, kind of like from there, it was like it almost felt like maybe I had like in my heart let God in for the first time. Like I'd
Hmm.
gone on like mission trips as like a kid and like done confirmation, all these things, but like I don't think it ever really like meant it. Maybe it did, like, but it just hadn't had that moment, I guess, where like, you know, in desperation, I guess. And like looking back on it, I was like really interested. I was like listening to Mahershala Hashbaz, that band, Tori Kudo's
Oh
band. And
yeah.
I always thought it was kind of cool. He was like this like noise freak who was Christian. Kazuo Ono, the Buto dancer, finding out he was like a Baptist. Like I saw this like parallel where I was like, okay, like there's these like freaks that are kind of like Christian, and this is like appealing to me a lot more, on a personal level. I think it like kind of like discovering that stuff gave me permission. I think I know that sounds very shallow, but it almost is like it gave me permission to be like, I am a Christian, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
I think I told you this once before, like, and I hope I'm not rambling, but like I
No,
once
this
had
is good.
I once like felt like I had this need to go to this one church in Pasadena one afternoon. And I like drove there and I almost like went inside, but then I had this hesitancy and I turned around. I was about to leave and this like white Ferrari drove by me and it said Lucifer on the license plate. And I kind of feel like that was also kind of like this beginning of like these like kind of synchronistic events that were occurring where I definitely felt like I was tapping into something. I couldn't relate to people, to put it simply. Like I just like could not suddenly relate my logic to other people because like
Yeah, on either side, right? The church would
yeah,
think you're crazy, and secular would think you're crazy.
yeah, exactly. And it's like it just was kind of like suddenly feeling so real to me. It's actually kind of embarrassing for all. Like anytime like someone like I would say Jesus Christ or someone would I would like actually like start tearing up. It was like this like automatic response, and I was starting to feel this greater sense of, oh, like I'm not completely like autonomous, and
Yeah.
that there is this like kind of hidden language, you know, maybe like semiotics would be a good application of that term, where you can kind of like access and see God and experience
Yeah.
God. And like it was it was just like a gradual process of kind of that place I'd come to in my life in my mid to late 20s where, you know, and then I'd like gone to like an Episcopal church which I hadn't gone to since I was a child, and it was kind of like seeing the liturgy with fresh eyes for the first time. It just kind of reinvigorated that excitement, I think, you know, that like, you know, certain artists and musicians I was listening to like a lot of, you know, kind of sacred inspired noise avant-garde music, you know, Claire de Lys, what I don't even remember her last name, Coverdale or whatever, and like even like Tim Hecker. It kind of made a lot of sense to me suddenly where I was like hearing this music, like this loud organ music or choral music. And I was like, oh, okay, like there's a place for this, you know? I
Did
briefly
you
flirted with Gnosticism, but that was a very quick interaction. What was your
well
question?
no, well on the Gnosticism thing, what happened there? Like why didn't that get pursued?
I think generally Gnosticism is like a thing to be Christian and be cool and accepted, in my opinion, because it has like this inherent inversion quality to it. It's very dialectical, almost like on steroids. And you know, if you're kind of like a seeker, which I kind of can relate to being kind of that type of person, it seems to be this intellectually rigorous system to like attach yourself to. But I think ultimately a lot of it is kind of just like vanity of the ego, basically, and that it's not really the salvific rigor of like Christ's message and how that's like just alchemically changed me is just like infinitely more compelling on so many
Yeah.
levels, you know? Even
That's
though like I ascribe to like the idea of like researching the way Gnostics do, because there is a rigor in the research that they do, because they're always just trying to like prove the giant Christian conspiracy.
You mean like on a more of like a mainstream Gnostic level, or like, because I think there's a rigorousness in Christianity as well. It's just not perhaps the mainstream.
Yeah, it's just not the mainstream, I think it's like
Okay.
it's very easy to go into churchianity, you know, and you kind of like
Yeah.
fortify your beliefs like through dialectics, again, the buzzword today, where you're like you look at what's wrong with the culture, you look at what's wrong with that, and
Right.
you start to silo yourself in like your group. And I see it time and time again, and like I would 100% ascribe myself as to falling into that too. But like I think it's really important to kind of like recognize deconstruction can also be a way of naming that thin line that connects everything too. That like
Yeah.
form doesn't always like it's not like this sort of like cracked mirror or funhouse of mirrors. It's more like you can find these if like people ask me like, what were things that, you were into that turned you towards God, I would name like Neon Genesis Evangelion, Buto dance, Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker, like stuff that's just like not overtly Christian really, but it's kind of there. Like you can feel that spirit in there.
Oh yeah. It feels kind of like biblical almost, like where like we've almost kind of created some sort of weird caricature of the Bible. But if we didn't have that cultural baggage with it, if you read it just like for the first time ever without any kind of like context for it, it would seem, I think, very different than it does now.
I think a lot of it is the room that like, it's kind of what I was saying that C.S. Lewis was making this remark of in That Hideous Strength, where, and I think a lot of that book is the characters realizing like how weird and like strange Christianity truly is in the context of like the kind of cosmic war and what Christ had to do to save people. It's not like there's this grotesqueness. And I think Kazuo Ono, with his performances around grief of losing his mother and like being in World War II, present that kind of grotesque vulnerability that I think is an affront to like multiple types of people. Like, for kind of trad, macho Christian types, it's too feminine and too grotesque. But then, for, more liberal progressive types, it's too Christian and they can't touch it. And I think that's like really that beautiful tension point that I think is what makes just the message so powerful to me, is that like the offensiveness, because like the stuff I always really liked was just extremely offensive music and art, because I don't know, maybe it's just me rebelling against like the kind of weird Silicon Valley type suburb I grew up in. But it's like at the time when I was like, kind of rediscovering, kind of the Christian story and subsequently my own like faith or soul in that process, it was like, I was really into, transgressive Japanese cinema like Sujio Terayama or Toshio Matsumoto. I was listening to like, I don't know, Suicide or something, or just stuff that's very confrontational, and that was just something I really was drawn to. But like I think there's a place for that, I really do, because I think it's littered all over the freaking Bible, where it's like, and even the early church fathers, where you have this just like, it's a story that's too insane to truly, turn into, just neuter, I guess, with like just extreme wholesomeness. And like, I think that was kind of this moment where for me personally, I was like, it was this kind of unifying of like a personal dialectical tension, because at the time I was really trying to fight an addiction. And in order to like kind of do that, you kind of have to have this sort of like vulnerability around like self-improvement. But then I was also like really resentful of kind of like normative tropes, which kind of also stunted my ability to kind of completely be like, okay, I need to like be like a recovering addict or something. And so it's like, it was kind of this moment where I was like, oh, there is this unification of this, like grotesqueness and vulnerability and like beauty and horror can kind of exist simultaneously without this kind of like corny trope that seems to kind of emerge from like ideology. So
yeah,
to me, it was on a very personal level. So
no, I 100% agree. I'm very similar. I had a very similar path too, because I got into probably like a lot of the same things you did. Yeah, that's I think the beauty of like the actual gospel is that it's a kind of like I mean, it is offensive in general.
It's totally offensive and it's totally confrontational.
Right, but the interesting thing about it is that it doesn't stay there, right? It's not like a transgressive thing.
No.
It's the goal. I mean, actually, this mirrors the way the prophets worked in the Old Testament, where like they would do some sort of grotesque. I mean, basically, it was like a performance art, and it would kind of like reveal the grotesqueness of what was happening. and the
Yeah.
absurdity. And it was, I mean, some of this stuff is nuts. Like you look at the Old Testament prophets and you're like, the stuff that God had them do, like this is crazier than any like stupid contemporary performance art piece. And it was like, you know, several thousand years ago. And then like but it doesn't stay there. Like there's a redemptive arc to it always. And so
Yeah.
oh hey, I'm sorry, dang it, hold on, I'm sorry, 1 second here, can we pause? All right, dang, sorry, man. My wife called like 4 times in a row, and I was like, "Oh shoot, there's like a problem," you know, because she like and false alarm. So
Oh, that's good. Thank goodness. Could I go get a drink of water really quickly? Actually,
yeah, dude, go ahead.
give me like 2 minutes to just get a drink of water.
Perfect. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I grabbed a whiskey, dude, because I'm like I need to like wake up or something. So it was good.
Oh, you got to do what you got to do, man. I had a glass of milk.
So where were we before I interrupted us?
The kind of transgressive aesthetics, I guess I was into, or
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about how the Bible in general is like somewhat dark, like definitely like opposed almost, maybe not opposed, but like the fuller picture of like of Christianity is essentially like incorporating a lot of the dark stuff that happened, which is interesting because like that's what drew me in. And I guess like jumping back into that part of things is like for me, I always liked some of the dark stuff. And I always found something very, very I guess for lack of a better term, like very Christian about even like black metal.
yeah,
Um
totally.
and you know, like the sound, like is obviously like quote, you know, so-called real black metal is not Christian. But there's something about like the darkness of it really resonated with me, and just even like dark stuff in general did. And I think that's why I became like so excited about like the kind of like the dark mystics, because I'm like, oh, okay, like there actually is this side to the relationship with Christ, like the apophatic kind of mysticism,
Yeah.
cloud of unknowing, which still blows my mind that that wasn't an Eastern book, but
Yeah, it screams it, you know.
it definitely does. But yeah, like there's something, and even when even like after, like right around like 20, like 2020, 21, like I started running into more Christians, and you know, there's a lot of them who I met who came out of like, you know, metal scenes or like dark electronic stuff, or
Yeah.
even like the emo rap stuff that were like, yeah, like I feel drawn, like there's something spiritual here, and not like in an evil sense, but like they could find God in that. And I think you can see that even in the Old Testament with some of the writing. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's like an overlooked aspect of faith, because the kind of wholesome culture took over and kind of like relegated that to, yeah, because of the duality thing. It's like, oh well, it's
Dialectics,
dark. Yeah, it's dark, so it must be bad.
yeah, I think that's something that people really struggle with, is that, yeah, just because it's dark doesn't mean it's, you know, necessarily bad, you know.
Right, like Pseudo Dionysius and, you know, Gregory of Nicaea, like, or
Yeah,
Nicaea, I don't know how
totally.
you pronounce it. You know, they cover a lot of that stuff, and they're actually Western too. So it's interesting. Like there is this kind of like, I don't know, darkness maybe isn't the right word, but like in some ways it does
Well,
make sense, because it's like the cloud that Moses went into was dark, right?
Yeah,
And
there's
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I mean, I do think this stuff is really overlooked. That like the cloud. I mean, Saint Gregory of Nyssa says it in book the Life of Moses, that like everything died on the mountain that touched it.
Right.
And that like it was a hideous, like horrifying sound that was coming from the cloud, and like maybe it's too I mean, I think it is the dialectical psyop of ages, basically, of the knowledge of good and evil, of just being this kind of way to regulate things into a left or right paradigm. And I think probably the Eastern Church gets that right.
Yeah.
Probably not them interpreting it in the West, but generally speaking, like reading Dostoevsky or Nikolai Gogol, I can definitely feel that kind of like Russian folktale darkness, while still very much they're writing within the Christian paradigm. And like even like the Theosophist Madame Blavatsky, who kind of gets a lot of shade from Christians. She loved Orthodox Christianity. And and maybe that could have been her nationalism coming out, or just more that like the spiritual, I don't know if this is the right application of this word, but occludedness allows for, I think, just this more I think it really challenges a lot of the kind of presuppositions of like the modern church and its interpretation, because its obsession kind of with reading the Bible, studying the Bible, regulated to knowledge.
Yeah.
When they can't really understand like why the relics of like saints are put within a church. And that's kind of in a lot of ways the like abomination that nice organization in that Hideous Strength is doing, is they're doing the same thing, is that like the human body is a psychotronic device, and it can be used for good or for bad. Like you have in like a lot of magic, the utilization of like bodily fluids. And like I would say Christianity is not limited to that. You are literally, in some denominations, it's believed you're drinking the body and blood of Christ. The relics of saints are within cathedrals, and like supposedly there's reports that those body parts disappear and come back, and they glow. And someone could say just being into that is like a form of re-enchantment, but like I think there is something to that, because even if something you can't prove that it's real, its influence can be there, the way it hyperstitionally manifests within culture.
Yeah.
That's like, that's kind of my thing of like saying why I believe in like Enoch and the Watchers, is just like that is everywhere. So it's like it doesn't even have to. It didn't even have to be real for it to be everywhere, because its influence is felt. So I think that. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to touch on something you said about like, and again, not to pick on like the Enlightenment again, it's becoming kind of like a cliche almost, but
yeah,
I think it is like, and this is maybe something that this is, that's probably why the Eastern Church does a better job with this stuff, is that they're like, they seem to be, although I'd say the Catholics do a good job with this too, is they seem to be more comfortable with like unknowability of God. And whereas like the West, it's like we have to know everything, like because of the Enlightenment. I mean, really, it is. It's like we have to like be able to distill everything and have an explanation for it. Whereas like the East was way more comfortable with this unknowability of God's like essential being, and so we relegate like, oh well, if you can't figure it out, then it's got to be evil. Whereas like that wasn't the case. I mean, especially wasn't the case in like the ancient times, like God was unknowing, like he had an unpronounceable name. Like
no one has known God.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think that maybe that's like what the purity culture comes from. I think, basically just like a lineage of like Enlightenment, Reformation, the Puritans. And then like at some point we just were like, we had to know everything, and everything that was relegated to the unknown became some sort of like enchanted evil kind of darkness. Because that's even something I noticed growing up in like a Presbyterian church that was like not comfortable with the supernatural at all, was
Yeah.
basically like they didn't believe in the supernatural. Like
No, they don't.
there's angels, but they're in heaven. Maybe some miracles happen, but it's God himself. And if you ever encounter anything crazy, it's demonic. Tongues,
Yeah.
healing, any of that was demonic. So it was like anything supernatural. So there was like, they totally recognized the power of evil, but they never recognized the power of God. And that always like
Yeah.
struck me. And when I got saved, I saw the power of God. And I'm like, well, dang, like if I would have known about this, like I would have never have left. What the heck?
Yeah, I think the going back to the Enlightenment with what you said, I think it's a the the Renaissance and then leading into the Enlightenment, because the two kind of play hand in hand with each other, and like what you have is like the Greek philosophies being translated, and I believe a lot of that translation was actually coming from monks, like certain
Right.
orders and stuff, and like the interesting thing is you had like the Hermetica, and like Book of Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus being translated, and like the funny thing is with the occult sciences is like someone like Hermes is like seen as this like evil sorcerer in the West, but like there's even the great church, the like the early church fathers are in their writings say like something like thrice great Hermes Trismegistus or something, because he actually articulated the Trinity well. And it's like, I think what happens often is, I have a problem with like the word occult. I think it like makes people think of like, skulls with a candle on it, or like dark spells, or like Illuminati stuff. But I think a lot of it is just like arcane sciences, basically.
Right.
And
Right.
so a lot of that stuff is just, like a lot of the Greek philosophers were initiates. It's pretty clear with like Plato, even Heraclitus, perhaps. Aristotle seems aware of it. The occult sciences, which do have like sinful elements to them, blood drinking, or like the health benefits of blood drinking, for an example, being one of them. But like a lot of it is just this hyper rationality. You have a lot of that stuff entering into the Western culture at that point. And I think it kind of makes it hard suddenly for people to believe in God, because they start seeing, and this is something I have been really into for a bit lately, is they start seeing that phenomena has a order and reason to it. That like things can be the phenomena that may have been hidden within the kind of occluded realms of superstition and religiosity in the medieval ages suddenly has like an applied science to it, and therefore dispels its like fear of the unknown. The thing that like,
Yeah.
and then therefore God does not exist. That's like their immediate thing, and therefore God does not exist because of this. And it's like the thing that I always have been thinking lately is, well, God can use technology. God can use the laws of his own creation. Miracle, like what is a miracle? Like, is it something that goes against like the natural order? Like, I don't like
Right. That seems
this is
kind of backward, right? It's like
right.
separating God from his creation, which there is like a delineation, of course, but it's almost kind of like there's too much of a separation that we give.
Yeah, and I think Rudolf Steiner, who I'm a very big fan of. Him and like types like Edgar Cayce, who had these sort of remote viewing abilities and very psychic abilities, which I see are very often condoned by the church. And perhaps there's like a reason behind that, especially around like I think in Deuteronomy, where God forbids like consulting of spirits and stuff. But it's not to overlook that there are certain traits that human beings possess that are very profound and like in a lot of ways reflect, their divinity as God's image bearers. And Steiner even commented, who I believe, died a Christian and wrote extensively on Christ, that you go into a lot of modern, like contemporary churches, in his time, and he's like, they feel secular. I think that, like, when I go to a lot of churches now, where I'm like, okay, this is secular. Like, this feels very much like of the culture. This is like, I'm going to get a sermon on a movie and how it relates to God or something. But it's like, I'm not going to really worship Christ with like my body or my senses or, prostrations or things like, no, like I'm going to have my mind tickled a bit, and like, yeah, I think there is just this very, man, I'm trying to like not be this way of like being like anti-Western, but it's getting harder and harder for me.
Yeah, no, I agree.
With the direction I'm going, where like I see that the East gets a lot of things spiritually correct. I find it very indicative, apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but like when like the Nazis were supposedly, I put in quotation marks, supposedly defeated by the Soviets and the Americans, like their technology and their scientists went to America, and then their like psychotronic parapsychological studies went to Russia. And I feel like that's very indicative right now.
Yeah. Well, and so, and just to clarify, like, so no one listening like gets confused on the remote viewing thing. I think it's like it's that we're spiritual beings. And so there are these capabilities that we have innate in us. Like, I think completely. A lot of times, especially maybe in more like mainline denominations, like a spiritual gift is like you're special. But
right.
Like, I think even like non-Christians even have these capabilities, right? There's like Simon the Sorcerer and, well, anyway, but there are these abilities that people have as spiritual beings. And I think it's a matter of making sure that you're aligned with Christ and God and not being misguided. I mean, that's my whole thing with like, I mean, if you read the Old Testament, divination was a capital crime, but that's what the priests essentially did with the Urim and the Thummim. Is like they would like roll these gems on the ground, ask God for something, and they were essentially doing divination if you break it down, but like they were qualified. And the difference, I think, is between then and now is that we have the Holy Spirit, so you don't need to do divination because you can just ask God directly a question. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason why we were kind of like told not to do that stuff was essentially because we're like not on our own turf anymore, and essentially like we're not qualified. And that's kind of like my position against like psychedelics is that like I'm like I don't know if necessarily doing a psychedelic drug is like a sin in and of itself. Maybe it is. I don't know. I could be totally wrong. Like I don't do them, but like I think it's because we cannot handle it. And it's like, why do you need to have that kind of experience when you can just go straight to the Holy Spirit or Christ himself and get these answers? So you don't really need that stuff. And it's like you're just kind of setting yourself up for like deception when you go into those different territories. But like back to what you're saying about Hermes and stuff. Or was it Hermes? I think it was something else. But anyway, like what blew my mind was like early Christians were called like Sibylists because like they were using like Sibyl's prophecies against the pagans essentially. And because she was like actually correct in a lot of her prophetic words. And so Christians were like called Sibylists for a short amount of time in certain areas, because they were using their own prophetic words in the pagan realm against them. And it's crazy to me, like now, like that sounds like completely demonic and witchcrafty But back then, because they had such a close, like a much better understanding of like the supernatural worldview, like it wasn't like they knew that there was
Yeah.
like this gift that existed that could be used for good or bad. Whereas now we kind of like there's a clear delineation. It's evil or good. There is no like,
Mhm.
if you have the gift of prophecy, you're right, well, in charismatic circles, if you have prophecy, you're a good person. And in the non-charismatic circles, you have prophecy, it's demonic. But really,
Right.
it's like both sides have access to this gift. God gives to people,
Hmm.
it almost seems like irresponsibly, these
Yeah.
gifts, that can be used
No,
either way.
completely. Yeah. And I think there's a lot to go into there. For one, talking about like the gems and stuff that they use in like the Old Testament, and like, the New Age correlation with like, crystals and stuff. They found that the human DNA is basically a form of crystal in itself, and that the kind of lattice work of like a crystal can like be like an energy conductor. So like there's real things that are going on when people are practicing things. And I think the state at which, I think the thing that there's a very real science to a lot of this stuff, but it can lead you to being deceived, whether it through, and this is something I had, is because like, what led me to professing Christ as, Lord, is that, I had spiritual awakenings or things going on, and I couldn't explain for them, and like, in terms of like when we were talking about psychedelics and like pharmakia and all that stuff, I've never really like been intoxicated much in my life with alcohol or drugs. My own addictions were other things. Human beings are kind of like these like electromagnetic conductors, and we are from the earth. Like God specifically says that humans were made from soil and dirt, basically, and so we share these like properties with the earth. There are these like waves flowing through us, plasmic energies. The point I was getting at is that I haven't even had to be intoxicated to have my mind be, maybe it's not my mind, but see spirits or see things that people would maybe refer to as demons or spirits. And I take a pretty agnostic view on it, whether it's like, could this be, my mind being hacked by, an outside observer or intelligence, but I've noticed like the state of my like actual heart or spirit will actually indicate that this is going to happen. Like I've had moments where, one time I got off work really late and I just needed to pray because I was so tired that I just didn't want to fall asleep at the wheel and crash my car. And I felt this moment like God seized me, like he wanted to show me. And I remember I looked up and I saw like a light dart really quickly. And it was almost like in my mind, it registered like that's a UFO. Well, the reason I say this stuff is that like the spiritual, human beings are intrinsically tied to like the natural forces of this earth. Like we're literally made from the substances of it. So we share in the properties of that. And like in doing so, we can have experiences that can't be measured by the five senses, for all the atheists screaming out there. And we relegate these to this realm of supernatural spirits, these various things, but they have very real, like I'm someone who believes like, that heaven is in outer space somewhere, that like, I think it's the Slavonic Enoch that says like the departed souls orbit the moon. And like, I don't even care if that's like right. That's just kind of sick to me.
Well, even
Like,
even the first two books of the space trilogy of Lewis, kind of like
that's completely what he's getting
he's
at.
getting at that completely, like, and he was told like he got counteracted with like a bunch of things, but he was like, I'm still holding on to the fact that like that there's angels who rule over these other planets, and this whole kind of like outer space thing is real. Like he wouldn't give that part
Yeah,
up.
I see a lot of like reactionary trad types who I think are doing more damage than good, saying stuff like space is fake and gay. It's actually very Gnostic what they're doing. they're relegating their own views and their own theologies to a very limiting moment where like only the planet matters, and like that, like all this other stuff is just empty and like doesn't matter. And like, I think that that's a very way, like, you know, humanist way to like limit God in your own system, that perhaps like all these things have application and use, that like God like had absolute intention in creating these. So, and it, like they are a lot more like mysterious and such. So I think a thing that I've just really been on is to like, and I had this tendency for a long time, was I would spiritualize things, when in a lot of ways, like spiritual stuff is tethered to the material. And I think Lauren Connors, the avant-garde guitarist, said this once, like the spiritual is in the physical. And like that's, Joseph Farrell has said that too, of the ancient cosmologies, is that it wasn't a soul trapped inside a body like the Gnostic Platonists kind of think. It was more that the physical body was actually tethered to the soul. And so that's why they have these like various funeral burial rites in pagan cultures, or even in Christian ones, where like the relics and the heart and these other parts of these bodies were considered kind of these like psychotronic devices and stuff. So it's, in a lot of ways, it kind of makes the human body even more important than ever, which is like so often the purity culture thing that no one ever points out, is that it has a very dark Gnostic undertone to it of, you know, well, I just want to depart out of this world and, you know, like, you know, just be in heaven or something. And it's like, go to Pleroma. I don't know. I think the being alive and life itself is an absolute mystery and miracle and kind of an incredible thing. And I think that's kind of like the gift of, you know, Christ said that you will live, I bring you to like live life to the fullest, you know? Like, it's like, like, I think that's where a lot of like these like false forms of worship lead people astray, is that it's like, you're actually being denied the fullness of life. And a lot of like the churches, they fall into that spell too. Like I've even heard Eastern Orthodox, like ＳeraphimRose, like be like, oh, our world is a fallen, debased, horrible existence. I was like, you're going to say that about the created planet that God made, that's so intricate and beautiful? Like, I think people get very sensationalized, and again, this is when they fall into these kind of like cultural tropes within ideology and churches of, you know, dialectical thinking again. Spirit against body.
The body's not a condition, and it was intentionally created even before the fall. And so I think there's some sort of weird, and I used to think that too. I'm like, oh yeah, like, you know, one day we'll be free of these bodies. But that's really like of an agnostic, transhumanist view that somehow got translated into Christianity. Hey, one last question though before we wrap this up was, you mentioned before, like, you know, you mentioned it was kind of a gradual kind of realization of Christ, but you mentioned there was kind of like a moment when like it felt more how am I trying to explain this? Like it felt more, I guess, like I'll just say it felt more real than some of like the more performative things you did growing up. Can you explain that just like a little bit? Because I think a lot of people actually experience that and don't know, the church doesn't prepare people for like what that means, or like how, or that they might even experience like the condition of the heart versus, you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, I know what you're getting at. You know, I had a pretty good upbringing, you know, so like I never really had much of like and I mean upbringing just like you know, I still have, you know, parents I'm pretty close with. I never really like felt the need to like rebel. You know, they actually kind of like supported my like endeavors with their like, you know, and just, you know, love, and just from day one, you know. I never had the kind of like need to like rebel against my parents. So it was, and I say that because it was very easy for me to actually go to church with them and to like, believe, because, my mom was a Christian. She'd been like born again in her late 20s. And then my dad like came around like a little bit later. But so like it was actually like very easy for me to go to church, and I liked kind of like the holiday season ceremonies because they were like, dimly lit and things like that. And I think the biggest difference was, and only God would really know this, I was starting to have experiences that I could not measure. I could not measure by, rational standards. When I've told you this before, when I was in my early 20s, like I helped save a woman's life who had been stabbed in a, rather dicey neighborhood I used to live in. And, very violent experience without getting into too much detail. But I'd had a voice kind of tell me that was coming. And that was like kind of my first experience. And then, 6 years later, I'm having things walk on my roof. I'm seeing dark things dart around in my room when I walk in. I'm having voices talk to me. It actually got even more pronounced when I, pronounced my faith in Christ. I think for some reason, when the heart changes, the condition of the heart changes, you're kind of marked or something. Like, I don't know. It's almost like you're exiting this kind of like materialist haze of like pop culture, which kind of functions as this kind of like plastic world, which maybe metaverse will be that on a larger scale of this kind of like, I don't know, like vaporwave, artificial world. But I really, in particular, I felt like I'd crossed a threshold or something, or like an initiation. That's probably going to sound very heretical of me, but it definitely felt like I'd become aware of something, of like of sinister forces in doing so. And like I think, my arcane interests like, cryptozoology or ufology, and like I could never validate that stuff before I believed. But after, now I understand that it is a phenomena that exists alongside this. And it's like you do start to see that there is a conflict going on. And like, so I think for me, it's like I cried out to God when I was really frightened, because I didn't have that. And I still struggle with that. I still think I'm pretty kind of a moron, but like that kind of discernment of what's going on spiritually, because there are things that are occurring, and like you can open yourself up unknowingly to outside contact. And it's very much, and the way that stuff operates is by occluding itself, because it reinforces the cultural stigma and stereotype of you're just crazy, you're just sensational, you're dumb. And then it reinforces the dialectic of the church of being, you can't do this, this is demonic, shame, shame, shame. I'm not being pro seance or anything by any means by saying this. It's just it deepened my faith. I just like, I don't have that kind of existential terror, knock on wood, that someone like Kierkegaard or maybe even like Heidegger later in his life seemed to profess. Like it's very much like, if maybe it's more profound when Christ says, ask and you shall receive,
Yeah.
And I'm less and less, I don't say it with pride, like of being able to like say, oh, I've seen like a demon or this or that, like, because it can be prelest, it can be total spiritual vanity of being like, oh, I'm special or I'm unique or something. I think these things are available to anyone.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's like a lot of things. It's how do you use it wisely? Like the occult sciences are they have their negative reputation because, it's power, and that's human will. And, I think we're seeing that with kind of this, antediluvian Noah's World 2.0 that's, very much on the horizon. is that, you know, people will inevitably use, there's a reason human beings are like falcons with a hood over them, you know. I think if they knew more of it, it would create like a lot more chaos and stuff. But
Yeah, I agree.
do you want me to share with you really quickly, like one of my craziest paranormal experiences?
No, yeah, go for it, and then we'll close it out after that.
Yeah. So, my mom is from Reno, Nevada, and a lot of her family lives in Lake Tahoe on the Nevada side because it's split down the middle. We go up like a couple of times a year as a family to go see my aunt and stuff. So the last couple of times I've gone, I've had, you know, experiences, and they're probably the most overt I've ever had. And there's 2 nights, and so the first night, and they're 2 separate visits is the funny part. The first time we go up, you know, I'm staying, it's like I'm like in a guest room, and there's like these like kid bunk beds, but I'm like too tall for them, but I still sleep in it. And like, it's the middle of the night, you know, I still had my dog then. And, I just hear this like running downstairs, like full speed, like either like a big toddler or like my dog is like running down the stairs full speed. And because like I'm in this like bottom level area, so like the stairs are like right next to where I'm sleeping, and my door is open and it goes into the laundry room, and the light turns on because it's like an automatic flicker light thing. So the footsteps stop. There's nothing there. I like woke up to this. I was like kind of weirded out. So then I was just like, all right, well, I'll just sit here a little bit longer. And then the lights turn off automatically, and then they turn back on. And I was like, oh man, I'm out of here. I can't deal with this. So like, you know, I'm like staying with my folks and stuff. And so I just like go onto the couch in the living room, and I tried to have my dog there, and then he just like kind of was like, F this, I'm out of here. And I fell back asleep, and then I woke up, and dude, this like homeless Santa was like hovering over me, and it had like glowing red eyes, and I had like sleep paralysis. And yeah, it like freaked me out. I think I can't remember if I said anything or not, but it went, you know, it went away. But then this is the wild part. So, you know, I was up there, and then I come back up again. Like maybe this is like a year later or something, or 6 months. Can't quite remember. And I'm like wondering, I'm like, is this gonna happen again? Like, because like I was like, I didn't like that. That wasn't. I'm not into that. I'm kind of like too freaked out to go to bed. So I'm just like up almost the entire night. And then at like 4:30 in the morning, I start hearing someone talking in my room in like a language I've never heard. But like at first I'm like registering where I'm like, okay, wait, who the heck is up right now? You know, I'm like, it's like there's a bunch of people in this house. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh wait, no, I know what this is. And all of a sudden I have sleep paralysis again, where I can't speak, like my lungs are closed, and I'm like, can't get anything out. So I start saying the Lord's Prayer, and I'm like saying it, and I get like halfway through it, and it stops. And I'm like, I finish like the second half of the prayer like out loud, not being like garbly because you know my tongue is like stuck to the roof of my mouth or something. I'm wide awake. That just happened.
How old are you?
I was like, oh, this happened last year.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, man. It's like this stuff got crazier when I like professed my belief in Christ. That's the point I'm getting at. You know, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but you know, it's a long-winded way of saying, you know, that like it just the belief that I had as a teenager versus now is just night and day, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely.
I only share that stuff in hopes that it can be, you know, maybe compelling to a viewer or something, you know, not to seem like I'm like some special guy who's maybe a candidate to be put in an insane asylum.
I think actually people have this stuff more often than they would admit to, just because it sounds so crazy. You know, and I'm speaking like of people like not in the church. I think they have those experiences more often than they would like to believe, and I know that because like I've talked to a lot of people who are not Christian, and you end up, it gets late, you have a beer with them, and then all of a sudden like, you want to hear something crazy, and then you find out like all
Right.
these people who don't believe in God are like seeing spirits and stuff, and you're like, oh, okay, like this is actually a lot more normal than I thought, but no one wants to talk about it.
Yeah. Well,
And then on the
the
and on the
darkness plays.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, as I said earlier, the darkness plays its advantage in occlusion by seemingly being so absurd while also being incapable of being proven materially. And that's how it kind of continues its kind of more nefarious chicanery.
Yeah. So on the secular side, it's like you're special. And then on the Christian side, it's like you're special. And really like no one's special. Like we're just we're bodies tethered to a soul. Because
Yeah,
the world is a lot more spiritual than we give it credit for.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's, it's everyone most people I know have had experiences like this. I think perhaps like I do think like if you know it's real and you profess, because the thing that I always ask anyone before, why is it this stuff that's very clearly has a negative effect on people? Why does it not recoil at when you pray or say Jesus Christ? That's the question I would ask anyone who's like a spiritist and I have I have like some perennialist views, but there's like, why is it Jesus is so different than other things, I guess.
Right.
So,
Yeah, man. Gee, this is really good, dude. I appreciate you sharing all that stuff. Yeah. It was a long one, but I appreciate it.
yeah,
So
I hope there's some good stuff in there. Are we
definitely.
off the air now?
Yeah, hold on. Let me just stop it.